It's upsetting to see the reasons why people are quitting Yu-Gi-Oh's TCG or not taken seriously. Or sometimes even worse, they're simply ignored to talk about a competitive problem. As if competitive players are unique from casual players and their problems. The problems often span to all types of players indiscriminately, and Konami doesn't have a strong enough incentive to fix it. I'm going to cover a few large problems that MBT Yugioh and Farfa either ignore or just don't touch on, and then go over a couple of their videos point by point. The most obvious problem is that Yu-Gi-Oh is not a sustainable hobby anymore. Pricing and short printing have driven this towards being a forced career path rather than something to play in your spare time. Back when Sky Striker was the most meta deck, prices were comparable to Fiendsmith and Snake Eyes a couple months ago. The most popular Fiendsmith card ran about $30 a copy when I was able to screenshot it, and at max sometimes even $80. Even now, a Starlight Rare of Sky Striker Ace Rose is about $70 to $100 a copy. Cards like Bonfire, that have been reprinted since their initial release about a year ago, were about $90 on release. You shouldn't have to choose between playing the best cards in your hobby and buying groceries. Price gouging is too high, in part because we short print the cards. Bonfire's price went down mostly because of all the reprints it was given since its release. If they had just simply printed more on release, its price would have never been that high to begin with. They short printed it simply so people would be more inclined to try and pull for it in the set that it was released. Unfortunately, most of the time people wait for cards to be posted on a third-party site like TCGplayer.com and just buy whatever copies they need. Could you pull a really good card from a box? Sure, I've pulled an SP Little Knight from Age of Overlord when that first came out, but this is an impossibility for everyone to be able to do. Cards are always short printed, and often only given one rarity on release, when we have so many different rarities and just don't use them. Ultimately, if you really want people to get into the game, they need to be able to afford it. Konami would have to print more cards using all the rarities they have available to them when releasing these new cards and reprinting older cards into other rarities. The meta has been stale for a long time, and it's gonna continue to be that way. The best decks are always able to abuse generic support and refuse to restrict themselves in meaningful ways. Many Snake Eyes and Fiendsmith cards only restricted that their effects may be used once per turn, and they often do multiple things with one effect. Snake Eyes Diabellstar, for example, lets you remove it and another monster from the field, essentially making them both continuous spells. It also allows you to place a different fire monster in your spell and trap zone to return itself to the field. Fiendsmith Engraver let you discard itself to add another Fiendsmith card to your hand. You could target a Fiendsmith equip spell attached to a monster and shuffle both of those cards into their respective graveyards. You could then also shuffle a different Light Fiend from your graveyard to the deck and let you special summon itself from the graveyard. These cards do so much, allowing you to remove cards from the field for essentially no cost, since they can return for basically no cost. Malice, at the time of writing, was one of the up-and-coming meta decks, abusing generic support in the same way to make massive unbreakable boards with multiple disruptions. Meanwhile, looking at other decks like Charmers and Ghost Tricks, they have no such cards. Most of their cards are focused on their gimmick rather than trying to break the game. Part of this problem is because these decks are old, and when they're given support, most of it is lackluster or far too generic to help the deck itself. The last Ghost Trick card to come out came out in 2022, Ghost Trick Festival, and was a Link monster. But we can also look at the support wave from 2021 as well. It was 3 cards, Ghost Trick Shot, Ghost Trick Trick or Treat, and Ghost Trick Siren. Ghost Trick Shot is a good card. By all means, this is a card that could come out in a meta archetype and no one would bat an eye at it. It's one card allowing you to special summon from hand, flip your other monsters, activating their flip effects, and attach another card from your graveyard as material to your archetype XYZs. But then the other support cards are abysmal. If you send a Ghost Trick to your graveyard with Siren's random milling effect, you can search a spell or trap, unless you really need to flip one of your opponent's monsters face down. Randomly getting rid of cards in your deck that you might need is not always great, and most Ghost Trick spells and traps can already flip your opponent's monsters face down. Even Ghost Trick or Treat can do this for you at no cost, really. The only problem is it can be negated for 2,000 life points. And why wouldn't anyone pay that rather than have one monster become useless and face down at the end of the turn? Even the Link monster, Ghost Trick Festival, is underwhelming, letting you summon a Ghost Trick from the deck by tributing itself. Ghost Trick support falls more into the gimmick box rather than generic. All of it as a whole is underwhelming to improve the deck in a drastic way, and even then, most people would likely run the broken cards and avoid most of the archetype altogether. This is often the case when looking at Charmer decks on YGOProDeck.com. Charmer decks are often made to be splashable into other decks rather than support the archetype they're in. Looking at any of the Link monster Charmers shows that most of their effects are super generic, only based on attributes and having nothing to do with their origins at all. They consider themselves familiar possessed cards, allowing them to benefit from a few cards that interact with those cards in the deck, but otherwise they don't do much else. The familiar possessed hardly even interact with Charmers, only summoning themselves from the deck or hand to replace a Charmer if you have another monster with the corresponding attribute on your field. Even then, the level 5 channelers who consider themselves Charmers are far too generic to cohesively work with the mash of familiar possessed and original Charmers. They also lock any effect activations if you use them to search a monster with the same attribute, meaning your deck will need to consistently stick to one attribute or not activate any other effects that turn. They also only special summon themselves if a monster of the same attribute is destroyed by battle. They could have very easily also said if any Charmer or familiar possessed monster instead, making them better for the deck they copy their names from, but they won't. Any support for Charmers is painted with broad strokes in an attempt to make cards usable in many decks, to avoid needing to print more specific cards for those decks, at the cost of never actually supporting the Charmer deck itself. Yu-Gi-Oh! Games have also been really bad as of late. Duel Links and Master Duel are giant grindfest duel simulators. If I really want to play with someone, I can do it on Yugioh Pro and not need to spend hours trying to get specific cards that I need. The conversion rate is particularly rough in Master Duel. If you need a specific card, you'll need to trade in 3 cards of the same rarity to get 1 copy of the card you want. Most packs are also locked behind timers as well, which isn't helpful. So if you want to pull for a specific set of cards, you need to unlock the pack by pulling something that will do so, and then you can go on pulling from that set. It very much incentivizes the crafting system that is just grinding out cards you don't need to make them into cards you want most of the time. There is a solo player experience in both games, but it only really matters in Duel Links. The story modes in Master Duel are simply lore blocks and tutorials for decks that often have yet to be modernized in meaningful ways. Gem Knights, Ruin and Demise, and Monarchs, just to name a few. They add some more every now and then, but ultimately this is not the main draw of Master Duel. You could argue it more so in Duel Links, the constant rotating events that aren't all PvP focused, characters you can level and unlock through missions, stages to clear and gain rewards from. Even then, most of the AI you duel with isn't very smart, often just setting themselves up to get smacked by you, or only having very specific combos in the case of the Vanguard. That comes from the AI having a ranked player's deck. Most of the time, a Yu-Gi-Oh! Game is just going to boil down to being a worse version of Yugioh Pro. These are all problems that I hope will get expanded upon as we look at a couple videos that I think cope over how well Yu-Gi-Oh! Has and is doing. They tend to not focus on the casual side of things, which is I think a detriment to their overall points and arguments. We're going to start with the oldest video, Why Are Yu-Gi-Oh's Best Players Quitting the Game? By MBT Yugioh.
Hey everybody, Joseph Rothschild here, aka MBT, and
been a bad week for Yu-Gi-Oh!
Granted, this video was a couple months ago. I wasn't really up to date with Yu-Gi-Oh! Anymore back then, but shouldn't every week be a bad week? When you spend heaps on a meta deck for it to get smacked down in a couple months, only to be replaced by another deck doing something similar, couldn't every week be a bad week? This video focuses mostly on a video made by Sunseed Jess about why they are quitting competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! So I guess that's why the week is bad? I can't think of a week where I thought, wow, Yu-Gi-Oh! Was really on the ball with this one. But competitive players and players in general quitting a game is a problem for that game.
Okay, so we should probably talk about this Jess video, right? In a video uploaded earlier today, Jessica Robinson, a professional player from EU, revealed that she is stepping away indefinitely from competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! This comes on the coattails of at least a dozen professional players online, either through YouTube or Twitter, announcing that they're taking a hiatus for one reason or another.
Okay, a lot of people were quitting. Hopefully we get around to some of those problems I touched on earlier, because they affect everyone indiscriminately. Meta decks costing chunks of money, cards being too generic and getting abused, the few months that the ban list doesn't acknowledge meta and then crashes into it for the next new thing. These problems don't care about who you are, casual or competitive. They exist because the company doesn't respect the player base as a whole.
The reasons that Jessica describes in her video shouldn't be particularly shocking to anyone who takes the Yu-Gi-Oh! Trading card game seriously. They're the same reasons that pros have been echoing for the past couple of years, the same reasons why we keep getting this perennial news cycle of people feeling frustrated and burnt out on the game, and they're the same reasons that Konami seems completely willing to ignore. Obviously, Jess's decision to step away from Yu-Gi-Oh! Is her own decision, and I don't want to project any insecurities from the crowd upon her, but I think it's worth interrogating some of these larger reasons that keep cropping up and the mechanisms by which Konami could resolve them.
I'm probably jumping the gun, but do these problems that the pros echo only matter because they're pros? It should matter regardless of who echoes the problem. If a day one player has the same problems as a veteran, sure, the veteran might have an interesting lens to look at the game, since they've been playing for a while, but this doesn't discount the fresh eyes of a new player who may have experience in other games that get different treatment. If anything, both of them seeing the same problems should be a warning that something needs to critically change. Also, the quote insecurities from the crowd may not be the same reasons as this player Jess, but they could be nonetheless important. You need a casual audience to fund your competitive scene. They go hand in hand.
And also, I mean, why I have no idea why they haven't. Like, that maybe is a question as well that should be answered.
Okay. Another take next time could make that work a bit better. Anyways, there's many problems for them to address, sure, and they should tell us why they don't. Realistically, this isn't gonna happen. Hoping a problem goes away or just ignoring it is often the way big companies move past problems. They have no reason to tell us why things get short-printed, why they don't promote competitive players, or why they continue the trend of meta always making unbreakable boards. There's no reason from their perspective to do so. The cynical reason is they only care about money. They don't care about any other part of the game. The fact that they can print images on cardboard and people flip out over them and buy boxes on boxes sometimes to pull for something is all they care about. The less cynical answer is they're quietly working on these problems. They're much larger than we think and will take time to resolve in a way that's meaningful to us. You're welcome to take your pick, but I prefer the cynical reason.
So let's begin with a little bit about Jess. Frequently, these Yu-Gi-Oh! Is dying videos are easy to ignore. They come from individuals who picked up the game last week and were frustrated by how complicated it was. This is a pretty realistic perspective for new players, but it's important to recognize that it's not what's happening in this video.
Already, the stereotyping of Yu-Gi-Oh! Dying is only said by week 1 players who think the game is too complicated is poorly supported. I have no reason to believe that this is the case, nor would it matter if a week 1 player did make a video like that. Again, if a veteran and a day 1 player can agree on the problems of the game, then it has a critical problem that needs to be addressed. And the game has gotten more complicated. There's simply no denying this. Blue Eyes White Dragon used to be a really good card. A 3000 attacker who could run pretty much anything over? Now, for a card to be good, it needs to have as much text as Snake Eyes Diabellstar, and also search cards or summon monsters for free. There's pendulum monsters that have spell and monster effects. They don't go to the graveyard like most monsters, they sit on top of your extra deck. You could special summon them to zones that Link monsters point to. But also, Link monsters have a special zone to be placed in, the extra monster zone, and zones they're pointing to are zones where you can play more Link monsters. I could keep going, but by no means has the game stayed simple or consistent with its difficulty.
She has a ton of really impressive finishes over a ton of different years, and she's been in a ton of promotional material for the game, period. She's invested.
Just as an aside, anyone can be invested in something. Her being in promos for the game and being really good at it means her perspective can be interesting, but it doesn't automatically discount everyone else who isn't as involved as her.
This isn't some rando talking about how Yu-Gi-Oh's gone woke because you can play as lesbian VTubers.
I have no idea where that came from. There's nobody reasonable anywhere that I can find calling Yu-Gi-Oh! Woke being brought into major talks about it. And I can't even know what he's trying to refer to by calling an archetype quote-unquote lesbian VTubers. Evil Live Twins? Malice? Labyrinth? Sky Strikers? Trap Tricks? Many archetypes end up being very samey if you place them in this blasé generic framing. If this was meant to be a joke, it's a very bad one. If a point was supposed to be made here, then just say it instead of masking it behind this vague illusion. Just say what you're referring to. Mention what you're describing. If someone doesn't know exactly what you're referring to here, all you've done is politically charge your video for no reason. You've actively hurt your message by taking a jab at someone who, for all intents and purposes, might not even exist. At the very least, they don't exist in this conversation because it doesn't come up again. For a majority of people, quote-unquote lesbian VTubers archetype won't matter to them. They just want to play the game. Generally, you shouldn't push any type of messaging into any game because people aren't going to care about it. People aren't going to care about some crazy guy screaming about the lesbian VTubers ruining his Yu-Gi-Oh! But also no one's going to care for the crazy person screaming about how we only have to have lesbian VTubers in the game for inclusivity. People just want to play the game.
This is one of the game's best, clearly elucidating a really specific picture of why she's stepping away. So let's talk about the reasons. Firstly, Konami treats its top players really badly. So Farfa, you can just turn off the video right now, but I want to draw a specific analog between Yu-Gi-Oh! And Magic the Gathering.
I think this is a section we're going to skip. I don't know much about Magic the Gathering, nor do I think that this is a competitive-only problem. Konami treats everyone equally like garbage. That is simply a fact. They don't care about their top players, nor do they care about keeping a casual audience. They print things, people buy them, they make money. They don't need to respect us in that situation because people just inhale any and all products they make.
That's in direct contrast to Yu-Gi-Oh!, where currently, if you do well at an event, you get almost nothing. Jess talks a lot about this in her video, but she punched her ticket last year to the Yu-Gi-Oh! World Championship, meaning she was recognized as one of the top players in the world at the card game we all know and love. After wiping the floor with most Europeans, she went to the World Championship and wiped the floor with more individuals, getting a top 8 finish at the literal most prestigious tournament in Yu-Gi-Oh!'s history. And what did she get for doing so? Yeah, you know, nothing. She literally got nothing. In the video, she says she walked out empty-handed.
It's unfortunate for her that she got nothing from being one of the best in the world at Yu-Gi-Oh! But unfortunately, the company doesn't respect any of its players. I don't have more sympathy for her than I do a close friend of mine who also laments he can't play Yu-Gi-Oh! Anymore. I sympathize with them both equally. If anything, the fact that she's still punching her ticket to all these events makes me feel less for her. She's either paying for these trips out of pocket or having it covered in some fashion. That's already more than most Yu-Gi-Oh! Players, who might have trouble finding a local place to play in my case. If she can manage to take the financial hit of going to all these places and playing there, why not recoup some of the cost by making vlogs, talking about your tournament experience, make a breakdown of your journey through bracket, things you notice that are different at each of the places you're playing. There's things you can do here to make a media presence and get some money for it, even if the cost of all these trips outweighs what you can make from vlogging and making content. You can't just hope that the company is going to recoup everything you spent to make it to the finals. You can't just hope that the company is going to recoup everything you spent to make it to the finals. You also need to put in some work and get some of that money back. Does it suck that the prize is essentially nothing? Sure, but you also have the opportunity to go to all these places and meet a bunch of people that most people aren't going to have. It would be smart of you to capitalize on that in some form.
This prizing scheme has been replicated time and time again in Yu-Gi-Oh! And it's truly frustrating. Did well at a local tournament? You're probably receiving your prizing in packs. No big deal, it's just locals.
It's just locals? That's as far as most people even get to compete. I don't know why you would show your blatant disconnect from most by saying, it's just a local. Who cares if you won 3 packs? Winning itself is a massive achievement that could make someone's day. It could make someone's week. In comparison to regional and global events, yeah, a local's gonna be small, but it's probably the most that a majority of people will end up playing in person. With Master Duel out, more and more people will have a bigger reason to just compete in online events. So going to a locals and winning at any level is probably going to be important to people. Even more so if you bring your favorite deck. Something that's probably not going to hold a candle to something meta, or sometimes other more rogue tier decks. Even then, if you smash a locals with a meta deck, it's going to be important to you. It's just so strange that a creator whose sole focus is Yu-Gi-Oh! Is willing to so easily brush past the fact most casual players are going to be playing at the local level. And winning these is going to be to some degree important to them.
Did well at a regional? Well, I hope you enjoy a rubber mat and a deck box, because that is what you're getting. Now that you've done well at a regional, you're headed to the national tournament where you can compete for another rubber mat and a deck box.
I can agree that the prizing is probably not as spectacular as it should be. But again, relying solely on the payouts of winning when historically they've always been underwhelming is pointless. If anything, it's just ignorant. And what if someone looked at this and just said, it's just a regional, or it's just a national? Because being upset at those responses is justified. I just don't understand the enshrining of good players just because. You should respect all players and the scale at which they play equally.
Sure, Wizards of the Coast isn't super generous with their prize pool, but in Yu-Gi-Oh! The prize pool is non-existent. Usually individuals are fighting over a rubber mat and occasionally a Nintendo Switch, a 7-year-old console at this point.
As if playing for a console is compared to nothing? You just described a shallow but existing prize pool. What do you mean it's not existent? Just because you can purchase a Switch like it's nothing and see no value in it doesn't mean it's non-existent. I know people who still, after all this time, didn't bother with a Switch, and I'm sure people have had problems with the console. I've had one completely shut down on me and I had to buy a completely new one. The Switch is still roughly $250 to $300, and while that's not a huge prize pool, it's something. Downplaying it to just an 8-year-old console is incorrect. While the Switch 2 is on its way, the Switch at that time still had plenty of games, and while it runs some games like garbage, the newest games in their respective series are sometimes in this console. Again, the prize pool could be bigger, but there's a history of it being completely underwhelming. You said yourself that this is an ongoing problem. I don't know why downplaying a $300 console is going to help your point here. You could just point to other games that have much larger prize pools than Yu-Gi-Oh!
Now, I understand why a lot of people don't see a particular problem with this setup. It's one of the reasons why it's been widely reported that Kazuki Takahashi said something to the effect of he didn't want money coming into Yu-Gi-Oh! Because it would make it feel like seedy gambling in a basement somewhere. With the understanding that you can't play cards for a living wage, why would you even put money in the pot anyway? Just give people the clout of winning, which they can then translate into something sustainable by making videos about their deck profiles or something.
You basically are gambling to play the game if you don't want to use third-party sites to pick up cards. You'll need to buy multiple boxes of sets and pray that you get a usable deck list at some point of the cards you like. But most people would rather use sites like TCG Player to pick up specifically what they need, rather than gamble about $80 on a box to get something that you may need. The game is already gambling just in the inverse. You don't gamble for prizes, you gamble to even play the game. And again, you can do more than just make a deck list video after you enter a tournament. Make a video talking about your experience in bracket, about the people you met, about what else you did besides just enter a tournament. If you're so tunnel visioned on Yu-Gi-Oh! That you do nothing other than make deck lists at a tournament, You're better off being a Yu-Gi-Oh channel that just uploads duels from a friend's house, giving them a snappy name. It would basically be the same thing.
But honestly, this is just completely at odds with the reality of modern cardboard. Decks like Snake Eye Fiendsmith are creeping into the $2,000 range. If it costs an arm and a leg just to compete, shouldn't you get some sort of return on investment if you're willing to put in the effort to actually do well?
No, it's not something that's owed to you. Should players get a little more respect from Konami and the TCG affiliates? Sure, but they don't owe you a living wage because you went deep on something that probably started as a hobby. If I was to purchase swaths of old coins, sort them by year printed and price, I can't turn to the government and tell them they owe me for my investment. It's up to me to make that investment worth something. We've also just glossed over that a Snake Eyes Fiendsmith deck at this time could cost somewhere in the thousands of dollars. I don't know why you wouldn't want to talk about that. The price of entry to try and play something meta before it gets hit on the ban list and replaced by a similar archetype costs somewhere in the thousands? Surely that doesn't help someone who was playing a meta deck professionally recoup their losses when they need to change over to a deck that is similar to the last meta deck they previously played and have to be out another couple $1,000s.
And as for seedy gambling, card games have just been normalized to the point where I don't think that's realistic. Lorcana, the game in which you cast Disney characters and sing songs together, gives out 5 digits of prizing to people for making top 64 at some events.
Good for them. They respected their players and probably don't have as many problems with their game as Yu-Gi-Oh! Even then, do those players who earn some of that 5 digits of prizing have to share? Is it a pool that you earn some from depending on your placing, or just by hitting top 64 do you automatically earn $10,000? This isn't clear enough, and even if they did earn $10,000 just by hitting top 64, I'm sure they aren't just relying on getting this top cut to earn a living. They probably have other revenue avenues as well.
As a result, there's very little incentive to push yourself as a pro player. Yes, you can stoke your own fires of self-determination, but the hours that you spend practicing the game are going to come at the realistic cost of your ability to hold down a job, relationships.
Then you just give up. Just give up. If a game is so controlling over your life that you can't even have a job or friends in your life, then give up on it. The game doesn't owe you anything because you dump X amount of hours and X amount of time into it. You can at least hope the company respects you, but we've already touched on some issues that in my eyes tells me the company does not. So just drop the game. Find something else that respects your investment. Something that allows you to hold a job and have friends. Even fucking crackheads have friends. If you're doing worse than a crackhead, you need to reevaluate what's going on with your life.
To put in the effort necessary to be really good at this game, you have to make sacrifices somewhere. And when those sacrifices come at the benefit of quite literally no money whatsoever, it can be hard to say yes to it.
Again, you can sacrifice whatever you want to play the game, but that's your choice. If you want the game and the company to respect you because you've thrown everything away for it, it won't. It doesn't have to. There's no contract, no moral imperative, no reason you could apply to you dropping multiple things in your life to focus on a game with a historical lack of respect for its players to make you suddenly get this investment you are owed. In reality, you aren't owed a return. You chose to go deep on this game. You need to have a plan in place to monopolize what you're going to be doing. Obviously, the game isn't going to just hand you a golden ticket just because you know what cards to use and activate and what negate to respond to. You need to find a way to make this game monetarily worthwhile to you.
The second reason that a lot of people are taking a break at present is because the format is really bad.
The format has been very similar for a long time. The meta archetype can either make a massive board you can't counter on turn 1, or just stop you from playing the game entirely with a mess of negates they make turn 1. Then it takes a couple months for the ban list to hit the meta, because they don't want people to stop buying all these new hot cards right away. And by then, we already have a new archetype that does exactly what the last meta archetype did, and that becomes the new meta. It's an endless cycle of replacement with zero innovation. The format's been very similar for a while, it's just now people are finally burning out on it.
So if you haven't been following the last couple of months of Yu-Gi-Oh, here's a quick explainer. There's a singular deck, Fiendsmith's Snake Eye, that's head and shoulders better than anything else. It isn't so dominant that it's risen to the level of Tier 0, but it is extremely powerful. The other decks in the format are still playable, things like Tenpai and Yubel and Ritual Beast and Gimmick Puppet, but largely the non-Fiendsmith Snake Eye decks are not really playing Yu-Gi-Oh per se. Tenpai is a deck that benefits off of the fact that going second has been so bad for so long. Konami has printed some truly outsized going second tools. They get to load up on Raigekis, Dark Holes, Lightning Storms, and of course really powerful lingering effect hand traps like Mulcharmy and Dimension Shifter. Ritual Beast is another shifter deck that has also benefited from the recent and baffling unban of both Thunder Dragon Colossus in some corner cases, but mostly Arch Nemesis Protoss, which can call fire and win the game on turn 0. Gimmick Puppet FTK is just an FTK. There's like a legal FTK with tops at the YCS level this format. Why are we all okay with this?
Is that the line in FTK topping events? That's a horrible line. You want to wave away the pricing of playing meta decks, the fact that going second is only viable for this one deck, Tenpai, the fact that we've even printed Maxi 2 Electric Boogaloo. But FTK's topping events is unacceptable? Let's be real for a moment. Someone building a massive board turn 1 with multiple negates and disruptions is essentially an FTK. Unless you magically draw your out and break the board every single time, you won't be doing much when looking at something like that.
A lot of people are quick to blame the problems of this format on Fiendsmith Snake Eye, but I'm going to be completely honest with you. I feel like it's the only deck in the format actually playing Yu-Gi-Oh! It's incredibly expensive, incredibly challenging, and the time that you spend learning the deck can be completely nullified by a tournament run in which an opponent just opens Shifter on you a whole bunch of times.
So the deck is either all in or bust? It's a gamble with hundreds of dollars to buy in? That's what playing Yu-Gi-Oh! Is to you? Then this game really does deserve to crash. If the only deck in your eyes playing Yu-Gi-Oh! Is something you need to painstakingly learn just for you to scoop in front of your opponent lucking into specific cards, then you might as well go to a casino. At least then you're gambling for some type of payout, because in your own video, you think the prize pool is non-existent. But it's there, it's just too small for you really. Yu-Gi-Oh! Involves 2 players, always has. For you to do your complex board building uninterrupted just to lock your opponent out of a majority of plays they could make, it's just a different game. This has been going on with meta decks for a long time, and it just isn't Yu-Gi-Oh! It's forcing the game to be a combo simulator. If you got to play Go Fish, but your friend never got to draw a card or even interact with you, they just had to watch you play until you ran out of cards and won, that isn't Go Fish.
Jess expresses frustration in the video with the state of things. She talks pretty directly about how the big names in the community, individuals who were consistently placing at events, really didn't at the last couple. That's because the way the format is structured, Fiendsmith Snake Eye is extremely powerful and extremely complicated. But the things that beat the strategy, things like Dimension Shifter, aren't too difficult to figure out how to use optimally. As a result, individuals spend a lot of time in this format preparing for scenarios that are never going to happen, because unfortunately frequently you're going to sit across the table from your opponent, get outdrawn, and lose on turn 0 to an effect that your opponent activated at the first possible opportunity.
This was already touched on, but those other decks only have a chance to play the game going second into Snake Eyes Fiendsmith at this time because they got lucky enough to draw into one of those hand traps. This is a meaningless complaint. If those hand traps were removed from the tournament, then everyone would just be playing the same thing, since there's no counters to it. These are a necessary check for the best decks because we don't have another way to do it.
It's a weird scenario insofar as the best deck in the room requires a lot of skill to pilot effectively, but every other deck in the room requires almost no skill, just the ability to outdraw your opponent. Unlike other formats, including some Tier 0 formats that I've been particularly outspoken about, the people who are doing well this format are largely professional players that are extremely skilled, but also individuals who have completely missed people who are one lottery ticket away from $1 million, opening Mulcharmy's Shifter every Game 3.
We just touched on the necessity of these hand traps for checking the best deck in the format, but that's interesting. There's a chance to win $1 million off some of these tournaments? I thought there wasn't a prize pool, that it was just a 8-year-old console, a rubber mat, and a deck box. Make up your mind. There's either a prize pool you think needs to be inflated, or there isn't one.
These two huge problems have coalesced into a kind of crisis. Professional players are feeling like their investment isn't being returned, both in terms of time, where their run can be stopped by an individual who is way less practiced than they are, and in terms of money, where they're investing a ton of cash into cardboard that isn't being reciprocated at all. As I've said in previous videos, this is in the face of a bunch of nascent card games that are promising a return on investment. I've been to bat for Alestrals a couple of times because I think it's fun, but it's hardly the only game in town. Lorcana has already attracted a significant amount of Yu-Gi-Oh's best. Christian Uranus posting about the Bucky band. Dinka Pham can't go 5 minutes without talking about what song he's gonna sing. And at base, I kinda can't blame him.
It sounds like those other games already figured out how to respect their players. Good for them. Konami still hasn't figured it out. And you don't deserve a return on your investment. You don't deserve anything from a company. Would it be nice if they respected their pro players? Yeah, but they should respect all their players. This has nothing to do with you being pro or not. Konami doesn't respect any players. As a pro player, do you deserve a payment from a company for playing their game at a higher level than most people? No, and you're naive for thinking it would happen. Konami doesn't respect any of its players by consistently short printing cards in high rarities, printing repetitive meta decks, creating ban lists that refuse to touch spammy meta decks until they've sold enough of it. They don't care about us. Don't expect them to magically give you a career. If you want this to be a source of revenue, you need to make it that way. No one else is going to do that for you. You need to make all these trips to tournaments and all these cards you buy have some type of return. You can't bring a receipt to a tournament and get a reimbursement. It's not going to work that way. To play meta in a game shouldn't cost you hundreds of dollars in the first place, especially with a ban list that's going to change month to month. You don't know when your meta deck is going to get replaced by a carbon copy. The signs for it are obvious though. The first ban list that touches cards you would normally run but doesn't shut your deck down is going to be followed up by a ban list that's going to make your deck much harder to play than the new meta slop. And still people are blowing all this money every single time just to get the new meta deck. They don't respect the players because they don't have a reason to. People are always buying the next expensive deck no matter what. That's why nothing's going to change, because for some ungodly reason there's always someone trying their damnedest to protect every issue with Yu-Gi-Oh! Or better yet, accept the problem and not address it. Like a certain someone in the pricing of the game.
I play Yu-Gi-Oh! Because I think it is the literal best game in the world. But that doesn't mean that I don't spend some time at locals looking over at the tables of people playing One Piece and having a great time and thinking, is it that much better than its competitors? Is it worth putting up with a company that cares this little about the people playing the game just for like a 2% better play experience?
Oh my god, I don't even know how you could say this with a straight face. Yu-Gi-Oh! Has zero respect for its player. A 2% increase is a 200% increase in respect. Did you not just spend the entire video complaining how the competitive scenes and rewards are pretty bad? Oh, but it's the best game. Not something like Solitaire that's been around ages longer than Yu-Gi-Oh! Yu-Gi-Oh! Is garbage. It's been for a long time. The fact that waves of competitive players quitting it made you even consider that it could not be that great is so unabashedly stupid. You just see these massive price tags and it doesn't matter to you. The repetitiveness of every meta deck to build a giant board with constant special summoning blocking your opponent from playing? Keep coping that it's the best game if you want, but nothing will ever change. You continue to spit shine Konami's shoes every second you can, but want to come out and also say that they could maybe do better sometimes, if only.
And am I willing to sit through enough rounds of Shifter Molcharmy to make up that difference? So with that all out of the way, let's talk about some potential solutions to this problem. First, let's talk about the pricing. This one's easy, just give us prizing. I know, Kazuki Takahashi didn't want the game to include money as a form of prizing, but like there's other stuff you can do. For a very short period of time after events returned post-COVID, people were getting Starlight sheets from the prize wall. How hard is that to give out to top performers? Sure, there is an additional transaction involved where you have to contact someone on the secondary market who's looking, but those were going for like $20,000. Like that seems like a reasonable amount of money to win for like performing at the national tournament.
We've already talked about the prizes, and you can't even make up your mind in this video if there are no prizes or the prize pool is too small. If they already said they don't want to give people money, don't expect them to give you some form of money. Again, make this make money for you. Make videos, talk about your experience, vlog about the areas you're in. You have agency to make money with these events. Just do it instead of begging in front of the company.
In fact, the prize wall for side events is actually a pretty good indication of how you could actually reward people without just handing them cash. Why are giant cards not a consideration for main event? Why don't we have specialty prize cards tailored to event anymore? Hell, One Piece is doing this better than we are, and they've been making a card game for 6 months, tops. Not to repeat Jess's example, but the fact that an individual can be recognized as one of the top 8 players on the entire planet and walk out of a tournament with nothing is embarrassing.
Yeah, it is embarrassing that the One Piece card game respects its players more than Konami, and it's only been out for a couple months. You know what they both also do? Don't owe you a return on your investment in their product. They give out better prizes than Konami because they respect their players, obviously. But both the companies don't need to collect your deck cost and pay you back on how much time you spent labbing your combos. This isn't how this works. You want to make money playing the game, then that's on you, not the companies that make the games. If you stream Eternal Return every day, become one of the best players in the game, they don't suddenly owe you money now. That was your choice. It's your responsibility to make it worth your while.
And secondly, with respect to the format, there's no easy way out of this. Again, a lot of people want to put the blame on Snake Eyes and say, oh, well, Fiendsmith Snakes is so unbelievably powerful that we have to resort to these lingering hand traps that win the game for us with no input. But cards like Shifter are going to be good if Fiendsmith is in the format or not.
You want to get rid of hand traps so badly? You're also going to have to unbloat all these cards that do way more than they ever should have. That's clearly not going to happen. Konami's not going to errata all these cards or ban them all. So we're going to have to be stuck with hand traps. Because yeah, Snake Eyes Fiendsmith being banned doesn't mean Dimensional Shifter is going to be bad. But that's because things like Malice and whatever else becomes the new meta are going to have to be checked by Shifter and other hand traps that will help keep it from running away with the game every single time. Otherwise, you can keep praying that they make a new master rule doing something like limiting you to only 5 special summons from the deck per turn.
It doesn't take a genius to recognize that if you ban some of the cards out of the top deck, the next 6 or 7 best performing decks are still going to load up on tools like Evenly Matched. I think what needs to happen is on this upcoming ban list, instead of just hitting cards for power reasons, there needs to be a deliberate design philosophy behind it. I've talked about this a great deal on some of my ban list videos, but it's frustrating that it seems like ban list to ban list, there's no through line as to what Konami wants Yu-Gi-Oh! To look like.
Problems with the ban list? But isn't this the best game in the whole wide world? It's just so hard to care about these points after you said that, because you clearly are just drowning in copium to have problems with the game and events surrounding it, but call it the best game.
Make a decision. Do you want lingering effects that are hard to track and require no skill whatsoever to activate to dominate? Do you want insanely complicated nuclear fusion style combos to reign supreme? Or do you want some secret third thing? A place where those lingering hand traps aren't specifically available to every deck. A place where there are a myriad of decks with different playstyles, none of which feel frustrating to play against. I lived through AGOV format. I know you can do it. At this point, unfortunately, curating a ban list so that such a format arises would require like upwards of 70 hits. I'm not just talking about like taking Flamberge out to pasture and putting Shifter to 1. Like you probably have to ban everything up to and including deck lockdown.
Even then, how does that fix everything? The older decks that were really good before this reoccurring problem of special summoning most of your deck in graveyard would just dominate again. Then we just have a new problem caused by fixing the other problem.
Regardless, I think this is sort of a come-to-Jesus moment for Konami. I don't think the current direction of the card game is going to kill it, but it's going to take the individuals who are responsible for the most thought being put into the game, the professional players that largely dictate how the game is played even at a local level just by disseminating lists and information, to become disinterested. And if that happens, the game is absolutely going to suffer.
This is not a come-to-Jesus moment. They simply don't care, and neither do you, by the way. You refuse to address any problems that a normal person might have to meaningfully grapple with to even play the game. You seem to only care about the competitive players here, because in your eyes they control everything. They don't. That's not how this works. Will they influence things? Absolutely. But my friend hand looping the hell out of Dark Worlds playing against my pure Ghost Trick deck didn't start doing that because a competitive player told him to. We like these decks for one reason or another and pick them up.
I think it's worth doing what we can to reward the people who are performing. Otherwise, they're all just going to have to start YouTube channels to put food on the table. Or edit for another YouTuber.
I made Top Cut at Euros, and all I have to show for it is this fucking mat. Cool.
This video has been brought to you by top 64 EUWCQ competitor Vladis. Alright, that's it. Bye-bye.
Oh my Christ, both of them are like wet cardboard. Again, if you want this game to be worth your while, it would be nice if the company respected how much you want to put into their product, but also they don't owe you something for engaging with their product, especially when their track record shows they don't care about players as a whole. There's another video by MBT I want to cover, but admittedly I need a break. So we're going to look at a video by Farfa. Why people quit Yu-Gi-Oh! The reasons and the myths. Admittedly, I'm going to be more selective about this video. Farfa rarely takes a stance on these positions, he normally both sides an argument. So we're mostly going to have to talk about the points that he brings up that wouldn't really fix anything or are just untrue about Yu-Gi-Oh! As an aside, his video is sponsored by Card Market, a site that subverts the original market for Yu-Gi-Oh! Cards. Something he should probably be against if he wants people to buy products that will support Konami and Yu-Gi-Oh! Directly. There were people pre-selling a card called the Lightless Shadow as a quarter-century secret rare for way too much money. The fact that people think they can get away with pricing like that is ridiculous, but then you think about all the other cards, Snake Eyes, Bonfire, Fiendsmith, and it's easy to see why they would think they can get away with something like this. Pre-selling these cards doesn't mean anything anyhow, you don't get them sooner than everyone else. Whoever you buy the card from still has to pull the card in the first place, so they're going to have to wait for the set to release like everyone else will. It's not like because you pre-order a card that specifically Konami will set aside a copy for you. You're just paying someone else to do what you don't want to do. Pull the card. I've already touched on the fact that Konami purposely short prints their cards, so I can see the appeal of pre-selling and ordering. It just doesn't guarantee you a copy like how a normal pre-sale would.
No, the problem is Fualos. Just one more ban list and the game is fixed.
I've been saying this exact phrase since 2011.
If the game in your perspective hasn't been fixed since 2011, you probably need to find a different game. The forgiveness you're granting a company that doesn't care for its player base is absurd. I don't know why else you would do that, other than that you just keep praying the game is going to be in a place where you'll be happy again. Realistically, you should drop it, and maybe just keep up to date with news on it. When it gets good, come back. But if it never does, that sucks. Find something else to play in the meantime.
Why did you quit? Why did you stop playing? And what was the last straw that made that love for the game fade away?
You cannot tell people why they quit. You can ask them, but telling someone why they did something is a very easy way to inflame a conversation. Will there be a lot of similar reasons? Sure. But you can't assume you'll be able to cover every single reason why people have quit. You pose these as questions, but you're really going to be telling people why they quit. Otherwise, there would be no myths about quitting Yu-Gi-Oh! You don't believe that some people's reasons for quitting are going to be reasonable or justifiable. So you're going to tell people why they think they actually quit.
But for as long as ever, really, Yu-Gi-Oh! Has had some really egregious expensive cards. From Blackluster Soldier to Dark Arm Dragon to Destroy Phoenix Enforcer, you can find something from every era of the game that, adjusted for inflation, could buy you enough shares in Tesla for those Cybertrucks to still be pieces of shit.
So pricing has always been a problem? Okay. That doesn't change that many people who looked at meta decks were seeing price tags that cost a couple $100s. It doesn't change the fact that these cards would be cheaper if they printed more of them and in more rarities.
Yu-Gi-Oh! Is an extremely expensive game that will cost a significant amount of money to be on the cutting edge of. However, with such an expansive card pool and a wide array of reprint options, there are alternatives that allow you to play the game at a somewhat competitive level for significantly less.
Somewhat competitively doesn't translate to competitive. Your deck will be worse off if you're not playing the best options available. And again, with accepting the high prices, are just all Yu-Gi-Oh players who have any interest in a competitive format like this blasé about the entire game pricing out swaths of old and new players just to make money? I don't know why people are so accepting of high prices in a card game, but stop it. Make the company print more products on initial releases. Make them stop wasting time printing a limited number of Uber Starlight Fleam cards and just print them in every rarity en masse. You'll never be able to criticize this game properly if you continue to randomly accept some problems as never going to change, but other problems you think need a dire change. The entire game needs a dire change, and it won't happen until people fuss over every major problem of the game.
For the price of the best Yu-Gi-Oh deck list, it is not uncommon to be able to afford multiple decks of other card games. If I enjoy Yu-Gi-Oh, but I also enjoy Pokemon, around about the same amount, let's say I have a 70% interest in Pokemon and a 75% interest in Yu-Gi-Oh. A deciding factor for me here might potentially just be to play the cheaper game, even though I actually like Yu-Gi-Oh. For a lot of players, this is a logical conclusion. Why would I play Yu-Gi-Oh when I can play other games for a fraction of the cost, and even if I was to spend the same amount of money in those card games as I would in Yu-Gi-Oh, I'd be able to buy like 5 different decks, switching up my playstyle and enjoying different styles of the game and from different angles whenever I want and whenever I go to locals, or compete at higher events. Now that sounds pretty bad.
Interest in something is not a percentage. It's fairly binary. You're interested in something or you aren't. And perhaps pricing in this case would matter to someone if they wanted to play competitively. Most people don't. It just isn't feasible for most, and even less so in Yu-Gi-Oh! Traveling to events is already going to cost something. But for these bigger competitive events, the cost is going to be much higher than just finding your nearest local tournament. Pricing is a big problem, but it sounds like we're going to accept this because it's always been a problem. But then talking about these other card games, he mentions that Yu-Gi-Oh! Is the most expensive of his examples. How this isn't something that needs fixing is so weird. The massive price tag to play good cards in Yu-Gi-Oh! Doesn't sound bad. It just is bad. Especially if these other games mentioned rarely have price tags this high for a single deck.
Now, Yu-Gi-Oh! Is a game with plenty of viable budget options. For as long as the game has been around, format to format, there have been pretty cheap alternatives to the best deck lists. Here's a regional where the top 2 decks were Ritual Beast and Sky Striker, getting first and second respectively, while both remaining under a cost of $150 for complete lists. And at the most recent YCS at Bologna, there were 6 Ritual Beasts in Top Cut as an example of a budget alternative to the top tier meta decks playing Fiendsmith. And we also saw a bunch of other decks at Bologna making Top Cut. We saw Labyrinth, Centurion, Rescue Ace, a lot of decks not running Fiendsmith as an engine, and even in top 8, there were 8 unique archetypes in the cut. So we do know, especially currently where we are today, that there are alternatives to the best decks and to the most expensive decks. Pearly is a very strong rogue deck. That thing costs literal dirt other than the staples, unless you want to play Fuelos. Melodious is a pretty cheap deck, and historically there are plenty of examples.
If everyone in your top 8 is playing a different deck, sure, your top 8 is diverse. It may not be true for the rest of your event, though. Everyone else in your event could be playing Fiendsmith Snake Eyes because it is the best deck in that format. They could also not be good at piloting the deck because they just picked up the most meta thing before entering a tournament. These other decks could be doing good, sure, but does that have to do with the player, maybe their starting hands, who's going first, in a bunch of other factors rather than because they chose to play the budget deck? By definition, they aren't running the best deck, so they have to have some other type of advantage on their opponent rather than playing better cards. And most non-meta decks will be fairly cheap. Putting together a Charmer or Ghost Trick deck is only expensive if you want to add modern staples, like Ash Blossom, Infinite Impermanence, or Divine Arsenal Zeus. This is also another problem with pricing. All cards should be roughly the same. For one deck to almost cost nothing, but for another deck to cost up to $1,000 is very clearly a problem.
There are a lot of decks in Yu-Gi-Oh! Like, a lot of archetypes that even today can see some strengths at the local or regional level. And again, I can't emphasize enough just the most recent YCS at Bologna, how there was something of upwards of 10 different archetypes in Top Cut.
Even looking at your own chart, a majority of players were playing Fiendsmith or Snake Eyes. There's variety in the top 64, but none of this variety was so good that people would drop the best deck in that format. I don't understand how you could look at this chart and assume that the game has a healthy variety anyways. All these other decks have less showing than just Snake Eyes on its own, without Fiendsmith. You could argue a majority of the top 64 weren't playing Fiendsmith or Snake Eyes, but this chart doesn't make you report what engines you're using to make your deck better. Technically, everyone here could be playing Snake Eyes and Fiendsmith cards, but they don't have to say so because their deck focuses on some other archetype.
And what I will mention as well is that the prices of a lot of these decks that you'll see on the TCG player card market summaries are somewhat inflated, because the numbers on your screen right now assume that you have absolutely none of the cards and are buying these deck lists card for card, main side and extra, from scratch. Maybe you already picked up Fiendsmith. Well, that in itself just opens up 4 other potential decks that you can play, since those cores are not as expensive. And it's very likely you already have a lot of staples like hand traps and some link monsters left over, so that doesn't really factor into the cost either if you've had them for years at this point.
I have no idea why you would say that. Like someone who just wants to play is randomly picking up cards from packs. You will either have some decks because you used to play, and they will have some staples in there, or you're a new player, and you realistically are not going to have anything. The prices on those decks are if you were going to build them from scratch, which a new player will 100% of the time have to do. Some older players sometimes too. If you only play variations of your favorite deck and now want to run a meta one for events, then you'll have to buy everything as well. Just because you already have something doesn't mean it didn't cost anything either. If I have 3 Ash Blossoms from a different deck I used to play and slot those into something else, they don't become free cards. I still had to pay for them, whether or not that cost was months or years ago. This also isn't something he ever touched on to fix pricing, but they could just print more cards.
Play Time Wizard. Pick up an Edison deck for like $30. Try Go format. Build 2014 format. Draft a single booster box between yourself and 2 or 3 other friends. You can build a cube by putting in some of your favorite cards. With all of the historical reprints for 13,000 plus cards, a lot of these will be dirt cheap. It will just require some time and effort. I personally haven't really played the TCG properly in like 6 months plus at this point, and I'm still really enjoying myself.
If you have to run away from the modern format of the game to go find some other niche format that allows you to play something you want, there's a problem with the game. Droves of people shouldn't need to hunt down these alternate formats to fix the game. The company that runs the game should fix it. But those problems won't ever get touched on if you just run away from the current format to remember what it was like to special summon a Cyber Dragon and beat someone into submission with it. These formats cut out large swaths of cards from their pools anyhow. What if your favorite deck is banned in these new formats? What if crucial support for your deck isn't legal? What if you just want the game to be good instead of needing to cope with a format from years ago? I also don't know how I'm supposed to trust you to describe the TCG now. You admit to, in this video, playing alternative formats for 6 months without touching the modern format. For all I know, you have no idea what's meta and what's expected to be hit in the meta rotating ban list.
If you don't like modern Yu-Gi-Oh, then try thinking of Yu-Gi-Oh as a sandbox. You don't need to force yourself to take part in playing it the way content creators or pros have you think it's played. You can make your own game out of it. With a vast and expansive card pool, you can absolutely find your own fun with the hundreds of different formats that the game has to offer. You can play with Pegasus rules, play with common cards only. There are many unique things to try.
And how many of these formats are going to be supported at an event? How much does Konami actually care about them? Put rules out for them? I doubt they even worry about a handful of these other formats. If your alternative formats are sections in this sandbox of Yu-Gi-Oh, they're shoved into a corner, only cared for by a small, select group of players who refuse to tinker with the more popular meta part of the sandbox. I shouldn't have to go hunt down some format that makes Yu-Gi-Oh fun for me. The base game, with all their cards, should be fun, but it isn't. The onus isn't on me to make the game fun. It's on the company running it to give me a reason to stay and keep playing it. I'm just gonna skip this entire section. If you haven't played the modern TCG in at least 6 months before uploading this video, I have no reason to trust you know what's wrong with the format. Even if you did touch on the correct points, you're not going to make your own personal stance known to us. You'll try to explain both sides of the game and avoid actually talking about the problems with the game. Because if you did, then maybe they would change. We're gonna have to skip this section for a similar reason. I don't expect you to know why floodgates are important for checking meta decks and powerful cards if you hadn't played the format recently before making this video. The regular format is what a majority of players are going to be playing. This section we just won't listen to. MBT basically talked about this for half his video, and at this point I'm losing all sympathy for this idea. So this last video is another MBT video. Just for the sake of contrast, the first MBT video was a couple months ago, and this one's a little more recent. Just to make sure we're staying more up to date on MBT's favorite game. This video is called Yu-Gi-Oh! Is broke, but how would you fix it? Yeah, your favorite game is broken. I'm sure that's something you can believe in. But maybe he's changed his mind since trash-talking locals like they never mattered to anyone, and ignoring the cost and bloating of generic cards. That's the hope anyways.
We are back with another Twitter thread. Today we're talking about the end of Yu-Gi-Oh! I'm just kidding, like that's pretty played out by now, right? But it is pretty incontrovertible at this point that Yu-Gi-Oh! Is in a bit of a rough state. Attendance at events is cratering. We are coming up onto a metagame that many people are not very enthused about playing, both because the format is a little rough and because it costs like $2,000 for a playset of Fuba Loss and Dominus Impulse. So rather than spending another 8 minutes talking about how the end of Yu-Gi-Oh! Is nigh and the sky is falling, we're gonna start trying to put that sky back in place. I'm asking you, the gentle poster, many of whom are constantly tweeting about how much you hate Yu-Gi-Oh! Okay, asshole, why don't you figure out how to fix it?
I only let that go for as long as it did to remind you that comedy is dead. I spare you from my own horrible sense of humor, and I spared you the pain of a poorly cut alphabet joke at the beginning of this video. God, no one should have to see that. Regardless, Yu-Gi-Oh! Will continue to be in a state of dying until copers are the only ones left playing. As long as none of the problems with the game ever get fixed, people will continue to grow fed up with the game until they can't help but quit. If a game keeps dying every few months, weeks, or even formats, it should be indicative of the problems with it. Also, no one is required to know how to fix the game to complain about it. This is the best game, after all. Shouldn't there be no problems with it? If there is, you should be the one trying to fix them. This is your best game, after all, having problems.
Beef says, I've completely remade the 2024 tins to solve the problems with not only them, but how bad opening recent sealed product feels. I want to get people back at their locals opening stuff again. So we've got Diabellstar the Black Witch and Centurion Legatia. I wanted to take everything that's worked from every tin across Yu-Gi-Oh's life cycle and make a premium super mega best ever product that keeps the chase aspect modern TCG looks for. Tins should feel good to open. All right, here we go. 3 promos, focus on cores, 2014, plus 2 tin rarity promos, 1 staple, 1 anime. 3 mega packs, 2019 style, focused on upgrading and downgrading, but keeps side grades at chase to maintain a reprint cycle. 1 Kaiba's Vault pack with extra or out of cycle reprints, 1 Yugi Kaiba token, 1 dice, 1 deckmate, silica gel in a Karibo packet. That is so cute. Are you fucking with me? That's genius. 1 QCR, 1 SCR for secret rare, 1 out of 14 quarter century secret, and it's like Blue Eyes or stupid shit. 1 out of 12 platinum secret. This is for reprints, imports, and world premieres. They should target out-of-date singles, and a regular super rare cashed in staples in constant circulation like Ash, Nibiru, Droplets, and Talents.
So this won't actually solve the problem of getting people to buy more cards. If you want people to buy more cards, stop short printing. Stop putting really good generic cards that everyone's gonna chase like Bonfire in one set on release. Because it took them 8 months for them to print Bonfire again. Cards wouldn't be so expensive if they simply printed more of them. But they won't do that because it'll cost them more money. And people like MBT are going to be gushing over the idea of a silica gel packet that gets thrown out having Karibo print on it, instead of actually talking about why cards are expensive in the first place. The tins idea, if anything, is probably just going to add to short printing. They'll only make so many and shove exclusives in them to sell them faster. You wouldn't even need to cook up a convoluted formula for what cards they put where and in what tins at what rarities if they just printed more of them. We're trying to give solutions to problems that already have solutions. We just don't want to acknowledge them because this is the best game after all. They can do no wrong.
House of Champs says better prizing with the no cash system, uncut sheets, giant cards and main events, product restructuring, return all foil side sets, better ratios, promo packs returning, and better communication from Konami themselves. Hire 2 VTubers as live twins for announcements. That is so fucking smart. Why has no one thought of that yet? Are you kidding me? So the first two are obvious yeses. House of Champs is pretty outspoken about how you can still comport to a no cash pricing structure and give people an incentive to actually play. Uncut sheets that were available at the start of post-COVID YCSs were a really fantastic incentive. And main event giant cards are being rolled out as we speak, I think. And both would be welcome additions to the structure. At present, the product structure makes no sense whatsoever. And God, Iron Mouse is what? The literal most popular streamer on Twitch. She's played Yu-Gi-Oh! Hand her a couple stacks, get her to talk about the ban list. How hard is this?
Again, with the pricing. This is something we've touched on at length. I don't know why everyone is so obsessed with getting a company that doesn't care about its player base to financially support the player base. Product does need a restructure. They should print more of it at all times in more rarities. Maybe then people would buy packs instead of waiting for a card to come up on TCG Player or some other website. Communication is something that isn't going to matter if they don't actually fix anything. They can send out some report puff piece to make people feel good and forget about the actual problems they should be addressing. Not to mention that that's going to cost money on not fixing the game, which is something that everyone should be wanting. Sponsoring one of the largest VTubers would also help get people drawn into the game, but it wouldn't do any good anyhow if this game can't retain players because it has so many problems. The tweet right under this one is the next 20 covers. It's largely easy to agree with. Both players should be engaging with each other, but also be able to play the game on their own terms. We're just unfortunately in a situation where cards would have to be changed, less bloated so they don't do so much, and printed in higher quantities. I mostly have issues with what is exactly called pack filler. You could argue in this recent short that MBT thinks all these support cards are pack filler. At the very least, he thinks they're bad support cards.
Why does Konami print cards that are bad? This week, Yu-Gi-Oh! Twitter has been ablaze, as it kind of always is, with a discussion started by Paul of Team APS. In this thread, he asks a simple question. What's with these decks that do nothing? Supreme Darkness, for instance, is packed to the gills with support for decks like Gladiators, Arcana Force, and Argo Stars, but why? In other games, alternative lower-powered formats and limited formats give these Tier 12 decks a chance to shine. But in Yu-Gi-Oh!, there's only one way to play the game. You could make the case that dedicated Arcana Force fans, however many there are, appreciate the legacy support, but in order to even be considered playable by modern standards, these pieces of legacy support often radically transform the gameplay of these fan-favorite decks. Battle brews like Gladiator Beast completely lose their identity just to remain bottom tier. That's to say nothing of the fact that the gameplay dreamed up for these decks is usually drab as all hell. FTK, FTK, stun, FTK. This even sucks for casuals. Heart of the Underdog is a step in the right direction, but Konami desperately needs to consider some way to give these decks a home outside of the bulk bin. You may be wondering,
unfortunately, they're necessary to modernize decks that were made ages ago and don't have all the supporting cards that they often get from the anime. Often they don't get modernized cards as time goes on either. They receive piecemeal little splashes of support. They quickly become outdated or don't fully help the deck become modern. To push for alternative formats because we simply don't want to take all the time to modernize these decks rather than print new repetitive garbage is ridiculous. And then to say that these other decks don't deserve their small little support moments is antithetical to the game having diverse deck options. If your deck doesn't work in an alternative format because it doesn't have its modern support, or it doesn't deserve any because we'd rather print Special Summon Meta Archetype 9, then why are you making a video clickbaiting the Gladiator Beasts? Why say the battle phase is back if you don't understand why Gladiator Beasts are getting support? Why any of these older decks are getting support? To then also be upset that these fan-favorite decks lose their identity because their modern support has to be bloated is outrageous. All meta is bloated. Most things that were meta in recent times were bloated. This problem is never going away. I just can't believe it's the smaller, lesser-played decks that receive this criticism rather than the $1,000 meta dumpster fire. To then say Heart of the Underdog is a step in the right direction doesn't make any sense. This card does nothing for any of these decks that are receiving support. And if you mean the format, just say the format. This alternative format is just another running away from the actual problem of the game. Just like Farfa avoiding the format for 6 months. If you want people to play alternative formats, the plague of short prints, high prices, and players who just simply prefer to play something that isn't legal in those formats is not going to change. And the amount of people who will always be interested in alternative formats is going to be small. The unclarity on this Heart of the Underdog statement is enough to make me understand why he went to Twitter to find solutions for Yu-Gi-Oh! Rather than think of them himself. Probably doesn't help that he's deluded enough to think that this is the best game. Oh, man. A large chunk of this video is mostly pointless. There's no point in talking about a lot of it because we've already talked about something similar, or they just assume that having events tailored to casual players will make things better. Or even better, just selling more products that definitely are going to be short printed in large numbers. So we're really only going to look at one more point from this video and his outro, because then there's something else to cover.
I mean, this is the answer that I believe. Just give us fucking Rush Duel, man. The rules are simpler, bring in new players, they have alternate rarities that are cool as fuck. It's just fun. An Edison YCS. Why haven't we had an Edison YCS? There wasn't even an Edison YCS in the first place. It was an SJC. It's just crazy that, like, we get 500 people at these fucking Ultimate Time Wizard events and they're like, nah, it's probably nothing.
If they can't properly take care of the normal TCG format without bloating cards, short printing them, making way too strong generic cards, and making support that follows the same trend, how are they going to be able to take care of another version of the game? Rush duels could be interesting, but they would replace Yu-Gi-Oh! Rather than save it if that's something they're committed to do. Will the cards and rules be simpler and easier to learn in Rush Duel? Yeah, without a doubt. But if you want them to take Rush Duels and start making an entirely new game without learning how they ruined their old one, then you really don't care about your best game.
Ultimately, I think Konami is making good on some of the things people are discussing in this thread. I think that generally their pricing structure is improving, but I think that the game still remains out of reach to a lot of players, and they're going to have to do some of the stuff from this video if they intend to make it into the next decade. Bye-bye.
You could never even make up your mind if there was a prize pool or not in your older video. And clearly people talking about the problems can make the company change, and you refuse to talk about the actual problems with getting a casual audience for Yu-Gi-Oh! You actively call this the best game, in your view, but then also want to call out problems with it that will never actually reach the heart of the problems with the game. You get to love the game and attach your brand lovingly to it, but also milk all these things you disapprove of as problems. Make fun of older Dex fans and their support, but also proclaim that it's bringing the battle phase back. You get to comfortably play both sides and never actually do anything meaningful for the game. This will be a never-ending problem, it seems. Even with their newest product coming out for Yu-Gi-Oh!, people are glazing the ever-loving hell out of these new decks and any Blue Eyes support without considering how this doesn't really change anything. It's just dangling and shaking keys in front of you, a hearkening back to something nostalgic to keep you trapped here. Pricing won't change, product won't change, overbloating won't change. It never will unless these people making market stock watches on cards, shilling alternative formats of gameplay to avoid how bad the main game is, fence riding on the issues of the game even if they know what they are, actually consistently raise these issues and get people to stop investing. But they can't because their brands are built on this game. Should they acknowledge the decaying, rotting room they're in? People will leave, sponsors will leave. Their attachment to it will push people away from them, and they will die with the game. They are forced to never acknowledge the problems with the game, because if they do in a meaningful way, it could damage their bottom line. If they can't do that, the game won't be fixed, and the Yu-Gi-Oh! TCG will deserve to crash by their own hands.
Of course I think the poor deserve cardboard, just less of it.
But just draw the out.
I play Yu-Gi-Oh! Because I think it is the literal best game in the world.
I personally haven't really played the TCG properly in like 6 months plus at this point, and I'm still really enjoying myself.